Hello, everyone. I'm Kate Baldwin. Thank you so much for joining me. This morning, a near collision at sea and a new spike in tension between Washington and Moscow. I want you to look at this video and look how dangerously close the U.S. and Russian warships came to each other. This happened just this morning in the Philippine Sea. Russia is blaming the U.S. for this. The U.S. Navy saying it was actually the exact opposite, that Russian ship forced the Americans to perform an emergency maneuver to get out of the way and avoid a collision. CNN's Barbara Starr is at the Pentagon. She has had all the reporting on this, and she filed this for us just moments ago.
Kate, the U.S. Navy estimates that the Russian warship came within 50 to 100 feet of the U.S. Navy ship as it was operating in international waters off the coast of China. Now, the Navy says this was an extremely dangerous move, and they produced the video to the public to show what happened and just how close the Russian ship came to the U.S. Navy warship. You can see it in this video. The Russian ship operating extremely close. I mean, literally, it seems like the U.S. sailors could have jumped onto the deck of the Russian ship. One of the key indicators here is the wake of the Russian ship that you see in the video. The Navy sources are telling us this is the kind of wake you would see at high speed. The U.S. Navy ship at the time was trying to land a helicopter on its deck, and to do that, it has to maintain a steady course for the helicopter to land. But as the Russian ship came so close at high speed up alongside of it, they had to wave the helicopter off. It couldn't land, and they put the ship into full reverse to try and get away from the Russian warship. It's just the latest incident. It makes the U.S. military extremely concerned about some potential miscalculation by the Russians, either at sea or in the air. A number of Russian aircraft have been intercepted by U.S. aircraft in recent months and weeks. A lot of concern about how the Russians are operating and a real concern about trying to avoid disaster at sea or in the air. Kate?
No kidding. Barbara, thank you so much for that. Joining me right now for some much-needed perspective on this is Ray Mabus, who, of course, was the Secretary of the Navy under President Obama. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kate.
So you see this video, and what's your reaction?
Well, it's stupid, it's unprofessional, but it's part of a pattern. Russians have a thuggish government, and they've been trying to provoke the U.S. or do these incredibly dangerous, just stupid things over and over and over again. I mean, ranging from everything from interfering with our elections to trying to push us out in the air, at sea, away from things we need to be doing in international waters.
Is there any reasonable explanation that this wasn't an aggressive maneuver on the part of the Russians?
No. This is one of those things where you can believe the Russians or you can believe your lying eyes. This is very clear evidence of what's been going on, and you know what they're trying to do with saying it's not their fault is just muddy the waters. It's just make these blanket denials.
And Secretary, the fact that the Pentagon, declassified and released this video so quickly today, what does that also tell you?
Well, it tells you how certain the American ship was in its actions. It tells you how well the Navy has responded. I mean, we've got an incredibly professional Navy. It doesn't do stuff like this. And when there's a denial that's put out there that says, oh, no, we didn't do it. Providing this sort of film with the definitive proof, because you can see the wake, you can see how close the ship comes, you can see the reaction of the American ship. It's just powerful proof that that exactly what we said happened and what our Navy responded to is exactly what did happen.
Any collision at sea is, of course, dangerous, but how dangerous could this have been? What could have happened?
This could have been just catastrophic because you're going at high speeds. You've got an American ship that's trying to recover a helicopter. You've got a Russian ship that is going really fast, closing on the American ship, and people could have died, and a lot of damage could have been done. this was, again, just really a stupid thing to do.
Beyond releasing the video, what do you think the U.S. should do in response to this?
Well, first, you can't be intimidated by stuff like this. I think we should not only continue the patrols that we do around the world, I mean, that's what the Navy does, is give us presence everywhere, but we should step them up. And we should make clear that we don't put up with this sort of thing. And the reason it's so dumb is that you can have a miscalculation. You can have something that is unforeseen, and then it spirals out of control. Our sailors, our captains, are really good seamen. They will do everything they can to avoid these sorts of things, but you cannot let yourself be pushed around in this circumstance.
If you pull back just a second, I mean, this is a Russian ship in Asian waters at the very same time that the Russian President Vladimir Putin is meeting with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Coincidence?
Probably not. Probably trying to show that Putin and the Russians are aggressive, can be just as aggressive as the Chinese, can be pushing America around or trying to push us out of those waters. And, some things may be a coincidence. This doesn't seem like it.
Wow. Secretary, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
An American and a Russian warship nearly collided today in the Pacific Ocean, and each side is blaming the other, which really isn't a fair way to put this. Because that they blame us and we blame them doesn't matter at all, because look at this. This had nothing to do with us. The video proves it. The U.S. military claims a Russian destroyer accelerated toward the American ship and came within an unsafe distance. Of course, Russia denies this because Russia denies everything. That Russia denies it is almost inconsequential. In fact, it is. According to the Kremlin, the Americans crossed in front of them, causing the Russian crew to perform an emergency maneuver. Jennifer, that's absurd, isn't it? I mean, there's video of this. Did they get it?
Shepard, you can see from the video the Russian warship came from behind and forced the U.S. cruiser quickly to throttle back to avoid collision. The latest incident took place in the Philippine Sea while a helicopter was landing on the flight deck of a U.S. Navy warship. This video provided by the U.S. Navy shows the Russian destroyer within yards of the American guided missile cruiser USS Chancellorsville, both warships armed with missiles and large naval guns. As she sailed past the American cruiser today in what U.S. officials are describing as a highly dangerous maneuver, Russian sailors could be seen sunbathing on the flight deck, mocking their American adversaries. Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan had tough words for the Russians on the steps of the Pentagon.
The behavior is unsafe and unprofessional. We'll have military-to-military conversations with the Russians, and of course we'll march them.
The Russian government says it has lodged its own formal protest over the incident and disputes the U.S. Navy's version of events, including which body of water the two ships were in when the near collision took place. Quote, USS Chancellorsville has crossed the course of the Russian destroyer in the South China Sea. The destroyer had to perform urgent maneuvers to evade a possible collision. Russia has been stepping up its harassment of the U.S. Navy. Tuesday, a Russian fighter jet buzzed a Navy P-8 reconnaissance plane in the eastern Mediterranean near Syria. The Navy says its plane was flying in international airspace during the 28-minute encounter. As Western nations celebrated D-Day, Russian President Vladimir Putin hosted the Chinese leader in Moscow Thursday. Putin was snubbed by Western leaders and not invited to attend D-Day celebrations in Normandy. These latest encounters by air and by sea are a not-so-subtle reminder not to forget about Moscow, Shep.
Jennifer Griffin, live at the Pentagon.
Now to an extraordinarily close call in international waters. The U.S. Navy sent CNN this video of what officials call a near collision as a Russian destroyer almost slammed into a U.S. guided missile cruiser in the Philippine Sea. Russia's Pacific Fleet is denying the U.S. account, claiming the American ship instigated the whole thing and that it actually happened in the East China Sea. Pay attention with me as we look at the video here to the wake created by this Russian ship. So 2 Navy officials tell CNN it could only come from a steep turn at high speed. You saw it there. This morning's provocation is actually the 4th military confrontation between the U.S. and Russia in just the past couple of days. CNN national security analyst Sean Turner is the former communications director for U.S. National Intelligence. So Sean, welcome back to you. And of course, I want to ask you about these confrontations as a whole, but first, just your reaction to what the Navy is calling a provocation from Russia.
Yeah, look, this was an absolutely startling provocation on the part of the Russians. As you pointed out, it's not unusual for the Russians to be provocative, for the Russian military to engage with the U.S. military both at sea and in the air. But what's particularly startling about this engagement is that you had a U.S. Navy ship that was involved in active operations to recover helicopters at sea. And so for this vessel to approach at that speed, clearly violating the maritime international law of staying 1,000 feet away, put those sailors not only on that ship, but also the military personnel who were flying those helicopters at risk.
Let me point to something. This is what our own Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr points to. We'll play the video and you can actually see some of these Russian sailors. Her word was sunbathing. You see these guys. Yeah. Is this obviously provocative, nefarious, or just being negligent?
Yeah. I think it's probably a little bit of all of the above. Clearly, those individuals who were laying out on the deck, who were sunbathing, who were just going about their day, it's pretty clear that they were not aware of what was happening at the time. But the aggression that we've seen with some more senior members of the Russian military is an aggression that has not been kept in check, certainly by the Russian government, certainly by Vladimir Putin. And so I think that it's a case in which, whether it's in air or at sea, Russian soldiers are kind of, run-of-the-mill troops. They're not fazed by this. Clearly, though, there was an understanding on the part of this Russian vessel that this American vessel was engaged in active military ops. So from that perspective, this makes this a particularly startling provocation.
A former commander called actions like this harassment, but 2 of this month's incidents were cases of the U.S. intercepting Russian planes. Do you think the harassment goes both ways, or is it an act of deterrence?
Well, you've got to look at what the purpose of these engagements are. If the U.S. engages with a Russian aircraft, oftentimes it's because that Russian aircraft is not where it's supposed to be, or is approaching an area that is patrolled by the United States. And so you see these engagements in which the United States attempts to communicate clearly with the Russians that they are not in an area that they should be operating in. On the other hand, when you look at this video and you look at some of the more recent provocations on the part of the Russians, you have U.S. vessels operating in international waters or operating in international airspace, and you have Russian vessels approaching them. And oftentimes, what we really have to look at here is the clear violation. Look, with regard to maritime vessels, it's 1,000 yards. And certainly in the air, there are rules with regard to how far these aircraft are supposed to stay away from each other, and there are rules about the communication. So I think there's a different purpose with regard to when Russia's doing it versus when the United States is doing it.
Sean Turner, you have been excellent on this. Thank you very much.